Lev's brother, Joseph, had a leg injury prior to the war, therefore, he was not drafted. He lived in Lev's room with his wife, Zina, and their 3 children. The entire male population was drafted to the war, and Joseph was one of not too many men left to work. He held a high position at the military plant in Leningrad, and the job helped him and his family survive the Leningrad blockade. Zina stayed home taking care of her small children. When the doorbell rang, Zina put her baby into the crib and opened the front door. A pregnant young woman in a military uniform, with a small suitcase in one hand and a pillow in another, smiled at her. "Hello. I'm Betty, Lev's fiancée." "What?" "Lev has a fiancée, but it's not you." "That's for sure," Zina said with confidence. "Yes, it's me. I'm Betty. He told me to stay here with you." "You are Zina, right?" "Listen, girl. My home is not a shelter. I have nothing to eat for the homeless like you. I have 3 children to feed. So just go away, and look for food and shelter someplace else." She shut the door. Betty rang the bell again, hoping that it was just a misunderstanding. Zina opened the door in a swift motion. "What word don't you understand?" "Go away," she yelled. "But I have no other place to go," Betty said, quietly. "Lev told me that I have to go to his place. If you don't go away, I'll call the police." Zina yelled. "He never told me about you, slut." Betty was standing in front of the closed door for some time in complete shock. "Who could take care of me better than my family?" She heard her own voice. She went outside. Where could she go? Her Aunt Jenna lived in Leningrad, but she was the last person Betty would want to ask for help, recalling her anti-Semitic husband. "After all, I'm a hero," Betty thought. "I have a medal for bravery." And she went to the army committee. It was a cold, windy day in April 1945. Public transportation didn't run, and Betty had to walk a long distance to the army committee. "Betty, you don't have to go." She remembered as the general doctor tried to make her stay with him. "You have so many friends here. Stay with us. We'll take care of you here. Leningrad is ruined. You have nobody there to take care of you." Betty walked, moving her legs heavily while supporting her stomach. She didn't feel well. Her headache started to harass her again. "Your frequent headaches, and the injuries you sustained could affect your baby." The general doctor's voice was so clear. I should have listened to him. Betty thought, crying, but it was too late for regrets. There were a lot of people at the army committee. She stood in a long line, waiting for her turn, supporting her huge stomach with her hands. Nobody offered her a seat or to cut in line. "I came from a field hospital," Betty said when it was finally her turn. She put a document in front of a commander. "I need a place to stay until my husband comes back from the war." A commander took a long mean look at the 2 rows of medals on her jacket that Betty proudly wore, and then his glance slid to her huge stomach. "Show me your marriage certificate," he said. "I don't have one." "We didn't." "Your husband," he smirked. "You are lying. Go, find your husbands, and ask them for help. Do you remember which one of them gave you what medal?" "I need a place to live," she started again, but he already was speaking to the next person in line. "I'm a surgical nurse and I just returned from the front," she insisted. Dismissed, he ordered. He was a higher rank, so Betty couldn't argue with him. It was already dark. Betty roamed the city the entire day, looking for the army committee and trying to figure out what to do, and she still had no place to go. She was embarrassed and exhausted. She had no other choice, so she went to Aunt Jenna, feeling very uneasy. Jenna lived in a small room of a 6-room apartment that was located on the 6th floor of a building without an elevator. Her husband, Nick, was a member of the Communist Party, worked for the KGB, and was a real swine. A neighbor opened the door, studied Betty's stomach for a long time, and then asked, "Want to eat something?" No. I mean, yes, but I'm looking for my Aunt Jenna. Jenna? Oh. Come in. Jenna, she yelled. There is a pregnant woman at the door for you. Nick walked out of the room, and Jenna walked after him. Who are you? He asked blankly. Betty. You. Oh, dear. Come in. Come in. Jenna walked Betty into the room. Nick followed them and shut the door. Depression and misery ruled this apartment. 5 single women lived in other small rooms. They survived the Leningrad blockade, but all had lost their husbands and children either to starvation or the war. They were different ages, but the grief and uphill struggles made them look much the same, with no age, no identity, and no future. Even though the apartment was overcrowded, it felt like death ruled there. It was silent and cold. Betty felt very uncomfortable because Nick didn't want her there, but she had no other choice, so she stayed. It was late April of 1945. Betty woke up and screamed due to a sharp pain in her stomach. Jenna and the other women walked her down the stairs from the 6th floor and all the way to the hospital. Betty delivered a little girl in terrible pain and inconceivable complications due to continuous starvation and inhuman conditions during the pregnancy. Are you sure it's a girl? Betty asked with disappointment. Yes. I'm positive, a nurse said, though she didn't smile. The baby is very small and weak. She won't survive, she added. Also, it's for the best. You are not even married. Betty didn't answer and cried. However, one day passed after another, but the baby girl didn't give up, and despite all the dark predictions, in a week, the mother with the little baby girl were released from the hospital. Betty came back to Jenna's place. The first night was tough. The baby cried non-stop, and nobody was able to sleep. In the morning, Jenna and the other women left for work one by one. Nick stayed home. As soon as the front door closed behind the last neighbor, he gathered Betty's things. You have to leave, now. Uncle Nick, but where can I go? Why do I care, huh? Go back to where you came from. Go. Go. He threw her suitcase and the pillow out the front door, pushed her out, and shut the door. Betty stood with the baby in her hands in front of the closed door for some time, hoping that he would change his mind. She knocked, but he didn't open the door. She picked up her suitcase and pillow and slowly walked down the stairs. She stepped outside into a small enclosure surrounded by buildings. It was the beginning of May, a wet and windy day. When Betty left the courtyard, the strong, cold wind made her come back. She had nowhere to go, and no strength to walk because she hadn't recovered completely from the labor. Betty remembered the neighbor, Vicky, asking her, "Want to eat something?" when she appeared at the front door of Jenna's apartment. Vicky was her last hope. Betty went back into the building entrance and sat on the stairs on the lower platform, but the smell of urine that came from under the staircase was unbearable. In a few minutes, Nick stormed down the stairs. "Don't even think of coming back with your bastard." He spoke rudely and slammed the entrance door. "I could sit here the entire day, and nobody will see me. I'd better sit outside, so that maybe somebody will take me in. It's impossible to breathe here." Betty thought in despair. She went outside again, sat on her suitcase, placed the pillow on her knees, put the baby on the pillow, and cried. The baby cried, but the young mother couldn't do anything about it. It was too cold to undress the baby. Also, she didn't have any extra diapers. The baby was dirty and wet. Betty was hungry, and the baby was hungry too. She cried and then fell asleep, then woke up and cried again. Betty sat on her suitcase the entire day, until the sun went down. People started coming back home from work. Nick came home first. "You are still sitting here. Don't even think of coming back to my room," he said, smirking, and disappeared behind the front door. Aunt Jenna came first. "Betty! What are you doing here? Are you crazy?" she almost yelled at her. "Uncle Nick kicked me out," Betty said. "He's a son of a bitch." "I'll be back," she promised and ran home, leaving Betty with the baby outside. Betty waited for half an hour, but Jenna was not coming to rescue her. A neighbor, Mary, came home. She approached Betty. "Hey! What are you doing here?" Betty didn't answer, but just cried. Mary put her hands on Betty's head. "God! You've got a fever. Come with me." But Betty was not able to get up. She was too sick. Vicky came close. "Take the baby. Let's get her inside." Mary took charge. "Mary, what happened?" "I think Nick kicked her out. It's so much like him." They helped Betty to get up and almost carried her back into the building, all the way up to the 6th floor. They entered the apartment, as Nick walked out of his room and glanced at the women. "You bastard," Mary whispered in disgrace. "Shut up." Vicky tried to calm her down. They walked Betty into Mary's room and closed the door. "Are you crazy?" Vicky whispered. "You want to end up in Siberia?" "He's a bastard." Mary was emotional. "Shut the hell up. He'll hear you." The other 3 women came and helped to take care of Betty and her child. Those women had had families and children, but now they had nobody to care for. All the men died, leaving widows without any hope of finding love, nor a child, but only for despair. Betty and her little baby were a bright light in the hopelessly dark tunnel of their misery. They were ready to give away anything for a chance to hold the tiny baby. It was a miracle, and they would never let it die. They didn't talk too much, being afraid of Nick. To them, he had all the power in the world. The rooms in the apartment were too small to accommodate the mother with the baby permanently, but there was a closet in the kitchen that was filled with firewood for the stove. The women removed the wood, placed it in every empty space in the apartment, cleaned the closet, scared mice into their holes, and brought all they could find to make up a bed for the mother and her baby inside the closet. They searched through their little things and found pieces of cloth to wrap the baby in, an extra pillow, and a throw. They found medications for Betty, and soon she rested comfortably in the kitchen closet with the dry and fed baby right next to her. "What's your baby's name?" Mary asked. "I don't know. We expected a boy," Betty said. "I never thought about a girl's name. Lev wanted a name that started with an A. Then, we'll call her Anna, if it's all right with you." "Sure," Betty replied simply. "Who was Anna?" "She was my daughter," Mary answered. "She starved to death during the blockade." A teardrop hung in her eye for a few seconds, but she didn't let it out. "I wish your Anna lives a happy and healthy life." "Thank you, Mary." At night, Jenna brought some food, shamefully hiding her eyes. "Nick doesn't mind, as long as it's not happening in our room," she said. "I'm so sorry, Betty." "That's okay. I understand." Betty and Anna lived in the closet for another very difficult 9 months. The baby got sick often. There was no running water in the kitchen, so Betty had to walk up and down the 6-story building to bring it from the river. She had to find and bring wood to heat the water. It was hard to find medication and food, and every obstacle in life was a huge challenge. However, she never complained. After all, she was a soldier and a nurse. She was always thankful for all she had, and appreciated being alive.